Welcome to Public Speaking with Peter George. Do you want to be calm, confident, and credible every time you speak in public? Then stay tuned as Peter and his guests discuss public speaking tips, techniques, and tactics that help you increase your impact, influence, and income. Here's your host, Peter George.
Everyone has their own speaking styles. The key is to learn from others, take the ideas that resonate with you, and make them your own. Of course, once you do that, you should continue to learn, always advancing and honing your skills. One of the people you want to learn from is my guest today, Jeff Belanger. Jeff is an author, podcaster, storyteller, adventurer, and explorer of the unexplained. He's written more than a dozen books that have been published in 6 languages. You may have seen Jeff on TV because he's the Emmy-nominated host, writer, and producer of the New England Legend series on PBS and Amazon Prime. Jeff provides programs and lectures to audiences all over the world, and he's been the writer and researcher for every episode of Ghost Adventures on the Travel Channel. Jeff has made media appearances on hundreds of radio and television programs over his 20-year career, and he has a passion for mysteries and legends. Hey, Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Wow, let's do it again. I already screwed up. No, leave that in. It'll sound natural and real. I was ready to be all polished and say thank you for having me, Peter. It's great to talk about public speaking with you. I think you should leave all that in, as a matter of fact. I would not edit that one bit.
All right, I'll leave it just as is.
Perfect.
Hey, Jeff, Ralph Waldo. Yeah, see, now we're both screwing up.
No, leave all this. This is great. We're being real.
This is the blooper reel.
This is authentic.
Jeff, Ralph Waldo Emerson said, all of the great speakers were bad speakers at first.
Yes.
So tell us, when did you first stop public speaking? And how bad were you back then?
It was 2005 on a night just like this one. And I was terrible. I had just published my first book. And what's cool when you write a book is that people want you to speak about it. And that's exciting because you're like, hey, I have all this work. I wrote a book. And I got up in front of an audience and I had all these notes because when you write books, you pore over every word. You want to make it just right. You want it to land just the way you want it to land. And I thought, well, public speaking is the same thing. So I wrote this whole speech and I read it to them. It's so awful. I would never do that today. But I read to them and I tried to make eye contact and then I'd lose my place. And I would try to keep reading because I thought I wrote it just right, like what I wanted to say. I got better along the way, but that was awful. But 10,000 hours makes you an expert, right?
So they say.
That was the first hour. And that was a tough one.
You know, and I see that a lot where when someone writes a book, people, like you said, ask them to speak, but one doesn't necessarily correlate to the other.
No, it does not. Or either way.
Either way.
Some people could speak very well and they can't put a sentence down on paper, and they are 2 different skills for sure.
Would you agree that writing is more solitary?
Yeah, writing is a lonely life, and I'm an extrovert. So you're on your own there, and it's draft after draft too. So, you write it and you revise it, and then you eventually get some people to look at it and then make some comments and you revise again. And then you get an editor and all that stuff. Public speaking is, I like to think of it as a performance because I'm a performer. I play guitar and when I step to a microphone to speak publicly, I'm thinking about this as a performance. And there's an energetic thing that happens between performer and audience, whether you're playing music or you're an actor on the stage or you're giving a speech, whatever it is. And what's amazing about it, especially when you do it a lot, is you learn it's not the same every night.
Not at all.
One audience is just in the palm of your hand and you're just riding this wave and this is just great. And you just leave feeling high as a kite. And then the next night you're ready to go do it again. And whoa, are you guys alive out there? And you realize you got to change everything. You got to do something different because what worked last night is not working tonight. And I love that. I love that the performance part of it. And there's some magic. There's a muse who descends, if you're lucky, often. And there's magic that has to happen between the audience and the performer. And when it's there, it's great for everybody.
I love that you put it that way because I feel the same way, that there's a certain amount of performing in public speaking and presenting. And there are a lot of people who disagree with that.
No, they're all wrong.
Oh, they go to that word authenticity. And I'm thinking, you can be authentic and perform. The best live actors are being authentic, but it's a performance. And that's the connection.
For sure. Yes, it's authentic and it's you, but it's you up a level. I think about musicians that I've seen where they're powering through a ballad that I know they've played hundreds, maybe thousands of times over the years. And you see they're crying. And they've tapped into whatever emotion was there when they wrote that song, and they're feeling it in their every fiber. Or they're incredible actors and musicians, right? But they've got to that place, that emotional place, and it's coming out of them, and it makes it so authentic. Now I'm there with them. I'm getting choked up, and they're hitting that emotional center. That's what a good story does. Whether that story is told in music or in verse or in as a speech, whatever it is, it hits emotional centers. You can't stay in one emotional place with a story. Like I work my day job, right? I work in fear. I work in ghost stories and spooky things. I can't scare you all the time. It stops working. I have to let you calm down. And then if anything, maybe I can disarm you with a little humor, make you get your guard down with a laugh. And then I can spook you. You're not expecting it. And so you have to move through these emotional waves to craft a good story. It's so important.
Speaking about a musician and tapping into that feeling, I listened to an article or an interview the other day with Eric Clapton, who is my favorite musician.
He's amazing.
I'm a guitarist as well, by the way.
Yep.
And he was saying, and I laughed at the first part, he said, I'm technically not all that good a guitarist. Like, yeah, okay. And he said, however, I can tap into emotion anytime I need to.
Yeah.
And when I sing a particular song for the gazillionth time, I can tap in like it was the very first time I sang it.
Yeah. And that's art. That's art in performing and craft. While I would disagree with him, I think he's technically pretty amazing.
Yeah, a little bit.
I saw an interview with B.B. King, and he did a collaboration with U2. I don't know if you remember, when Love Comes to Town and everything.
Yeah.
And they said, okay, so if you could play these chords, BB, and he's like, no, gentlemen, I don't play chords. I do this. And he just did the, wah, he just hits those notes. And I saw it. And then there was like this, it's called On the Fly, but it was a little side interview with BB. And he's like, oh, there's lots of people that could do what I do. But then he had this long pause and he just looks right at the camera and he goes, but they ain't me. And you're like,
exactly.
They ain't me. And you're like, you're damn right they ain't BB King. BB King is BB King. And that's what he does. We go to see him, or we did go to see him, obviously, when he was alive. We went to see him be BB King. That performance, that's still him. That's his authentic. In fact, if it wasn't authentic, we wouldn't buy a ticket. We wouldn't go.
No.
Clapton is authentic. Remember seeing him at the Garden in Boston, right? And just amazing. And if he wasn't his authentic self, but obviously ready to perform, right? Like cleaned up on the stage, on time and everything, and giving it his all. If that authenticity wasn't there, I wouldn't believe it. And I would be disappointed and I would walk out. Audiences can smell that. So performing, I don't think it's a dirty word at all. If you don't think of it as a performance, that you've something you prepared, right? When I step in front of an audience, I've prepared something for you. I'm not winging it. I would never wing it. That would be so disrespectful to you, the audience. I couldn't even imagine. I couldn't fathom doing that to them. It would be unfair.
I also believe it's lack of respect for us when we don't prepare, in that we're letting ourselves down.
The other thing too is if I don't feel prepared, I'll get nervous, and part of being able to go out there and give it my best means that I've got my stories down. I know what I want to say. I know where I want to start, where I want to go to, and where I want to finish. And then the magic can happen. And when it's really good, when it's really, really good, I get to step outside of my body and watch me and watch them because I'm in the zone. And that's when it's gold. There's a story and I want it to hit a certain way, and I get to actually step outside and watch the audience when I hit it. Like, do they lean forward when I want them to lean forward? Do they laugh and lean back when I want them to laugh? And when that's all working, oh, it's so good. You get to be performer and observer at the same time. But I can only do that if I'm prepped.
Nothing like it. Now, going back to where you spoke early on about when you write a book, and you've written more than a dozen books, countless articles, as well as television shows. How does this affect the way you approach public speaking?
So over the years, I've really honed story. And when you, especially television has such a short attention span. That's probably the closest translator, right? We have to grab you early on, take you somewhere, and then leave you somewhere. Same with books, same with articles, right? When you read a book, there's a trust thing that has to happen very quickly. Hopefully on page one, right? You open the book in the bookstore back when people went to bookstores, and you started to read it. And if it hooks you, and you keep going, and maybe you get to page 2 and you're like, I'm buying it. I'm in. This is good. And there's nothing worse than when we trust an author and we're with that author all the way, and you get to the end and the ending's no good. Like Stephen King, for example, who is notorious for horrible endings. Just I hit my word count, they dropped a nuke, the world ended, the end. And you go, oh, I was so invested. Stephen, how could you do this to me? You get so mad, right? But that trust thing is what makes you turn the page. It's no different when you're on the stage. I have to earn your trust quickly. I have to grab you, and you have to believe that I'm going to take you somewhere, or this whole thing breaks down fast. If you have a hostile audience that just thinks like, wait a minute, this guy's fumbling and nervous, and I don't know if he knows what he's doing, and should I even be sitting here? You got a big hill to climb at that point. And so in one regard, that does translate, where you think about how do I grab you and where do I take you? But on the other hand, the performance part of it, I don't get to agonize over every word. I get to just go. And why you said earlier, if we're going to show people under the hood here of the podcast, you said, if we mess up, we can edit. I love when you're on stage that you can't edit. I love that you're like, if the microphone disconnects and you have to just yell into the audience, or, if the lights fall or whatever happens, you have to work with that in the moment, and that becomes part of it. And so I sincerely hope, Peter, that I hope it stays in, because we got to keep going, right? That's what we got to do. Well, the other thing too is, one of my favorite TV storytellers, he once said in an interview, Stephen Moffat, by the way, who wrote the newer Doctor Who's and produced them and things like that. I love this. He said, I have a secret to tell you, and I'm going to tell you, but I'm going to give it to you in little pieces. And I may not give you all of it. You need to know that I still have a little bit in there. And I love that. When I'm in front of an audience, I have a secret. I'm going to let you in. I don't know how close. Maybe I got to trust you too, but I'm going to spill some stuff, and I'm going to spill it to you, and trust me, and you'll get there. And I will make sure we engineer a good landing at the end, and that you feel like this was worth your time.
It's obvious that you put a lot of effort into your public speaking, and it can't be a shock to you that I believe in coaching and training, especially in the areas where it matters in our lives. What special training have you taken for public speaking, if any?
I went to one Toastmasters meeting, and they talked all about like how to get over your nerves. And I was like, yeah, I've been doing this for years. So I left Toastmasters. I'm sure it's great. If you've never, ever done it, I mean, I'm not knocking them at all. It wasn't for me. And then I took an acting class at a reputable theater in Providence, Rhode Island. And it was just like, in scene work. And we sat down day one, and there's all these aspiring actors, and you go around and introduce yourself and say why you're here. And I said, good news, I will never be up for a part against any of you. Like, I don't want to be an actor, but I recognize that part of acting means you use your entire body, especially on stage. You use your whole body. And I've only really spoken my own words. I have to now learn someone else's words and try to emote, try to hit the emotional centers of those words, and use my voice, use my body, use my emotion, use silence, pauses to change the whole mood. And those classes really taught me how to do that with these scene studies. Shakespeare, which is difficult language, and I was an English major. Like if I'm what light through yonder window breaks, right? It is Juliet, and she's the sun, and whatever. I mean, it's just you have to feel it, because I don't know all the words. I don't understand them. I'm not that smart. So learning to use my whole body, learning to really hit the emotional center of another author's words made me a much better public speaker. And then I took improv classes, mainly because they were fun. Like as an adult, like you get to play and be silly. And I highly recommend it for anybody, even if you don't even want to be a public speaker, like just go take some improv classes and remember what it was like to be in the schoolyard. But that keeps you fast on your feet. And if you get heckled for some reason, which doesn't happen often, or once in a while, or a cell phone rings and someone will just take the call. Dude, I have no problem coming into the audience and grabbing the phone and like talking. Like I will You're now part of this. I didn't ask for it, but if you want to dance, we'll dance. And so just learning how to like be quick on your feet. And also the great thing about improv is that you have to work with others. The whole thing of improv is yes and. If you and I are doing improv, like remember that time we went to the McDonald's and all those clowns came out of the bathroom? Yes, and then we went and got in the getaway car and it was full of money and it was theirs. We stole it. Yeah, and then we got away from the cops and you just go and go and go and you feed on that energy and that's what a live performance is. I have a plan, but as we know, sometimes you got to toss your plans and go with what's there.
Now, I think a great place to learn, not formal training necessarily, but watching or speaking to stand-up comics, musicians, as we spoke about, illusionists are great at directing an audience. It's what they live by. Have you spoken to anybody like that where you've taken clues from?
Yeah. So I was doing a conference, and again, I'm a paranormal guy, right? So like that's where I write my books and stuff. And it was a paranormal conference years ago, and it was an audience of about 300 people. And there was a comic, Mike Brody, full-time comic. He feeds himself being a full-time comic based out of Minneapolis. And I remember talking to him, before, and he's like, "Look, can you warm up for me? Can you go up there and just like warm up the crowd so I don't go up to a cold mic?" And I was like, "Yeah, I could do that. No problem. I can work a room." And so he said, "Listen, whatever you do, just say, how's everybody doing? Where are you from? And then the last thing you say is my name. And then you introduce me." And I went up there and that crowd was hot. Peter, it was hot. I was like, "How's everybody doing?" Like it was like a rock concert. And I like, this is great. Oh, we got these people here and that. And it's going to be a great weekend. And blah, 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 everybody's cheering. And I was like, "From Minneapolis, Mike Brody." And he went up and he killed it. He killed them. And he was so good, so adept at what he does. They were rolling for a 45-minute set. And that's a long time to keep people laughing. The following year, same conference, different room, this underground cave bar, very dark. And he's like, "Same thing. Can you go up again?" I'm like, "I got you, man. No problem." And I get up to the microphone. "How's everybody doing?" Hello? Hello? And it's so quiet. And I went, "Oh my goodness, it's cold up here. It's freezing." And I tried it. And again, he's the act. I'm there to just sort of not make it a completely cold microphone. And he died. He died on stage, not literally, of course, in the figurative sense. And he and I talk a lot about the craft of what we do. I mean, as a comic, you have rooms where the energy isn't working and all you have are jokes. And if nobody's laughing, it's just, I can only imagine. I at least also have information. So if I try to be funny and the jokes aren't landing, well, then let me change tack and I can just be sort of informative and tell you stories, or maybe I can be a little more spooky tonight. But he's got to be funny. That's the job. And so I think you learn so much watching comics, and really good comics know how to use silence. They know how to wait for the right moment and hit the beat and have the timing. That's what comedy is timing, is when do I hit the line? And also knowing when to get off the stage. Comics will tell you have your closer joke. There's the joke you think is going to be your closer. But if you're near the end and you get the big laugh, stop there.
Yeah, get off.
Stop there and get off. And so you learn a lot. And musicians, same thing. You just see who's good at stagecraft. How can some people get up there and they play and no one notices them? It's like they're in a corner as background music, and other people are playing and they completely command your attention. There's this energy they put out that's just like, look at me because I'm going to take you somewhere important. You're going to be better for this. And you stop what you're doing and you put your drink down and you stop your conversation and you listen and you get pulled into the world that they are creating right there in front of you. And that's what a good comic does. That's what a good musician does. That's what a good performer does. When you see stage actors, right? They are creating a world and you're literally in it. And if I can tap into that, I'll just get better.
I suggest to my clients that they have a conversation with their listeners.
Yep.
How do you create a conversation when you're talking to an audience that has several hundred or even thousands of people?
When I write a book, by the way, and it took me a while to learn this, the first few, this was not the case. When I wrote my latest book, I wrote it for one person. I was thinking about a specific person, a guy I grew up with and went to high school with. He was I'm sitting down with you and I'm telling you this story that I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. I'm going to tell you the whole story to one of my dearest friends. And I think about that when I'm in front of when it's an audience too big to even make eye contact. I think about that. I think about it's one person out there and let me just talk to you as if you're one person. And that sort of helps me get into that mode. And I've also found that how can I disarm you? I mean, I want to grab you early on, but then also disarm that this is a safe place and we're all in this together. And so you can do that with levity. You can do it with maybe being a little self-deprecating at times, or you just do it by having a good grab and realizing like, oh no, this audience is already keyed up. I've got them and I don't have to resort to any tricks. They're already with me.
Now, everybody has their own style on stage when it comes to presenting. Some use slide decks, multimedia, props, and the like. Do you use any of these?
Yeah, often I do. I do often have visuals with me because especially when I'm talking about legends and haunted places and things like that. However, I generally will have no words on there. It's just photographs so it sort of becomes a backdrop. So if I'm talking about the haunted Lizzie Borden house in Fall River, Massachusetts, I've got a great photographer friend I work with, and there's just a spooky picture of the house with the clouds and everything. And it's very ominous. And it just becomes a backdrop. I want you focused on me. I don't put words up there. However, when I'm switching stories, like the story might have a title, and the title is meant as a pause. I can take a drink of water. It tells the audience, hey, that story's done. A new one's about to begin as I move through the program. But then otherwise, it's mainly just sort of decorative. I look at the PowerPoints I made back when I first started, and they were just filled with words, so many words. And now there's, just the titles. Then otherwise, and maybe if I need to remind you of a year or a date, and I've learned, and this is so true in TV. If I tell you it was October 23rd, 1876, a Tuesday, that's already way too much information. You know what I mean? Like okay, wait, October, what was the date? The 17th, the 16th? I missed it. And it's too late. It was the fall of 1876. That's all you got to know, right? I mean, okay, I get it. Before electricity, no cell phones, it's autumn, got it. So you sort of learn, what does the audience actually need? And sometimes details is not the answer. If there's something I really need you to know, then I'll have a handout. I'll print them out and you can leave with it. If there's something some data that I really need you to have, which in my line of work is never, by the way. I'm thinking of your other listeners out there that might want to adapt this. But yeah, for the most part, I don't want to bog you down with details. I want you to remember the story because the story becomes part of you. And that's the thing you remember. That's the thing we connect to.
Story is powerful.
Totally.
In that it's so powerful. How do you apply that to public speaking?
You've got to start somewhere and you've got to go somewhere and you've got to hit a climax and you've got to have a finish. And that's how books work. That's how TV shows work. That's how songs work, by the way. Like that's how poems work. And I think with public speaking, and I'm not speaking now as like a guy that tells weird stories and legends and stuff, but as a performer, if you haven't given that some thought about how do I grab you, I call it a lead in writing, right? Like what's the grabby lead that tells you, where we're going. So we start somewhere with, hey, I've got a secret to tell you. We're going to learn something. Here's an example, especially during COVID. I've been telling a lot of stories about New England vampires. And vampires have always been around in folklore during times of plagues. This is long before Bram Stoker, right? Consumption, tuberculosis victims were thought of as vampire victims. And people resorted to some pretty crazy stuff. I could get in front of an audience and I could preach to them how it's important to wash your hands and wear a mask and socially distance and get vaccinated. And people are going to dig in if they're politically inclined and say, no way, or yeah, I already did. Or I could just say, hey, we've been here before, even though none of us was alive. Let me tell you the story of this. There's a vampire in Rhode Island, by the way, several, as a matter of fact. It wasn't just one. You had multiple vampires in Rhode Island, and you could still go see their graves to this day. And they came around during the times of a plague, a pandemic. And suddenly you start going, oh, wait, we're in one now, aren't we? and then later on, it just sort of, they learn, they apply it to the world they're in now and go, oh yeah, we're not far off from digging up a body and burning the heart and mixing the ashes into an elixir in an attempt to break a spell, because someone said it might work. And that's the power, right? So what's the story that you want people to remember? And what emotional centers are you going to hit as you unfurl that story?
Are you one for hitting the five senses?
Yeah, sensory and descriptive, any sort of description of senses helps a lot when you're trying to get people into a location. There's a story I tell about the catacombs in Paris. And the catacombs are 30 meters below the city. And there's these networks of limestone tunnels filled with human bones that have been moved down there between the mid 1700s and 1800s. And when you walk down there, it's got that sort of musty smell, and it's very quiet compared to up above in Paris. And you can hear the water drip through the limestone, and you can hear the crunch of gravel under your feet. And it's cool. The temperature is very steady. And so that, I think, sort of takes you down there with me. Other stories maybe don't require as much sensory to get into them, but some do. And it's a tool in the toolbox, right? Use it if you need it. Or if you want to slow it down and you want to set the tone a little bit. I think those are great tools. I know we're talking about telling stories of history and legend and lore, but boy, if people who are presenting on any sort of like academic subject thought a little more like this, I think they would have a much more receptive audience. If they thought you even if you're talking about an annual report and the profit and loss for the last quarter, you still have a story to tell. There's somewhere at the end, leave me feeling good that, okay, this wasn't our best quarter, but this is why we feel good about it. This is what's going forward. This is the story I want you to leave with. That's powerful. That's powerful no matter what kind of information you're conveying.
Do you think a lot of people in business are reluctant to use storytelling because they don't see that as business-like?
Oh, I'm sure. I left the corporate world. Peter, I worked in the corporate world for the 7 longest months of my life. I got out okay. But at the same time, I think people feel like, talk about not being authentic. I think some people in the corporate world think like, well, I have to be corporate. I have to give the data and the numbers and give this information. And by loading you up with facts, I will be seen as smart and well prepared and all these other things, as opposed to sort of genuine and personable. You can put all those facts in a one sheet and hand them out to the audience and let them read them when they go home. What's the story? And I feel like if more people in business were to embrace that idea of give me something, like I'm here in front of you, either I have to be because it's required to be at this meeting, or I want to be because I need the information. If you can leave me with a story, that is the thing I will remember. I will not remember the facts, I promise. I won't remember the data, the numbers, the percentages, but I will remember the story.
Do you think those are the meetings that we leave and say, they could have emailed that?
They could have emailed that. I know. I remember once in the corporate, again, 7 months. I was once in a meeting about a meeting about a meeting. And I'm like, this is it. Like I'm in a Dilbertian nightmare now. And you're right. That's the thing. And not only that, one of the other mistakes people make, going back to audio visuals, is when they just read to you from their PowerPoints. Now, as an audience member, I just sort of find that insulting. I was like, well, I can read. You don't have to read it to me. I can just read it. I'm already at the bottom and you're only halfway. So now I'm bored, waiting for you to catch up to me.
Yeah, you're sitting there saying, flip the slide.
Yeah. Next. I got it. I'm a quick reader. Next. I'm done. I'm out of here. But I understand some people do learn better by reading and visualizing. But again, print them out and leave them if people want them. Tell me the story. Tell me, why we're here. How did we get here and where are we going? I think that's the kind of thing that's a little more inspiring.
And sorely missed.
Yeah. One of the mistakes people make too, I think, is Willie Nelson, Shotgun Willie, right? He said, you can't make a record if you ain't got nothing to say. Don't step in front of a microphone if you've got nothing to say. And that sounds so basic and obvious, but it's insane how many people do it. They're just like, oh, say a speech? Sure. Is this on? Okay, here we go. I'm so-and-so, and I grew up here, and let me tell you about my childhood memories. And you're going, what does this have to do with anything? Instead of like, you clearly don't have a plan. You're just rambling on a microphone. And now I feel like a hostage.
I think it was Richard Branson who said, if you have nothing to say, don't take up an hour proving it.
That's right. Oh, that's so true. Yeah. And brevity, right? Rule 17 of Strunk and White, omit needless words. How concise can you be? And I know when I'm doing a program, all I ever ask is, how much time do I have? If it's 15 minutes, I will prepare for 15 minutes. Don't let me get there on the day and tell me it's 14 or 17, right? Like it could be whatever you need it to be. Just, I need to know. If it's 30, it's 30. If it's an hour, it's an hour, because I need to pace and plan for that time. And I'm meticulous. Like I keep a stopwatch if I need to, or I make sure there's a clock nearby. Going over is rude.
Yes, it is.
Because there's probably another speaker waiting to go up and I'm eating into that person's time. If I can't say what I need to say in that allotted time, then I didn't prepare. and I have no business being there. So I think that's one thing that's so important too. And the other thing that inspires me, I love to listen to Moth Story Hour. I don't know if you're a fan. It's a podcast, but it's also an NPR show. Just regular people telling really great stories from the heart. And then I try to watch TED Talks, and they're all online. I specifically watch TED Talks that are about subjects that I'm not even interested in. Astrophysics, great, because a really great public speaker can make me care about astrophysics, even though I have no interest in it whatsoever. So, the TED Talks are all on YouTube. You can watch all of them. And so I try to pick one out a day and just be like, let's see what I can learn. Read, also steal from this person about how they do what they do. How can I take that and apply it to what I do?
Now, you've done a TED Talk, yes?
I did a TEDx talk in New York City a few years ago. It was boy, you prepare, because you have 10 minutes and the clock, this timer starts and it's counting down right in front of you. And there's a little more gravity to it because it's not just the audience there, but this is going to be online and these guys get a lot of views.
Now, going back a little bit to where you said, if I have 15 minutes, tell me I have 15, that's what I'll prepare for.
Yep.
Most of us, if we've spoken long enough, at one point, we're the sixth speaker of the day.
Yeah.
And 4 of the 5 have taken too much time.
Oh.
And if we're not cut completely, then they say, okay, you were supposed to have a half an hour. You now have 10 minutes. What do you do?
I've also found, especially if I'm at a conference and like one speaker's backed right up against the other, I usually do a collection of stories. And in my head, I know I can drop one. So instead of being an hour, I can get it to like 55 or 54 minutes. I would rather have 5 minutes and I'll play music or something before I go on. Never silence. You don't, a silent room can just get too quiet. And the great thing about starting with music, I've got like music that's been composed for me. I've licensed it and things like that. And it sets the mood I want depending on what I'm talking about. And what's great about music is you turn it up just enough that people have to talk a little louder to each other to talk over it. And that gets their energy up. And then when it's time for me to start, I just turn the music off. Oh, it got quiet. And everybody gets quiet. And I'm ready, right? It's just a little bit of audience manipulation to let them know, like, I don't even have to say, ladies and gentlemen, like it's got silent. And then I'll stand there. I'll actually stand there and say nothing. And then it's really fun. Like people just get quiet and they look at you and they're like, is he frozen? Did he choke? Is he concerned? And I'm just like, are you ready? And they're like, yeah, we're ready. All right, let's go. It becomes this sort of conversation. Like, I'll wait for you. That's okay. This is your show. I'm just the facilitator here. So I don't mind waiting for you. And it's kind of neat, that little bit of anticipation.
Jeff, where can our listeners learn more about you, your books, your programs?
My website is my name, jeffbelanger.com. My website has all my programs. Lots of them are still virtual, but in the fall, they're going to start being in person again. Yeah, my website's the best way. I'm also on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and I do my own podcast as well. But it's a scripted story. It's not interviews or anything, but it's.
What's the name of the podcast?
It's New England Legends. New England Legends, a strange story from New England every single week, about 10 to 12 minutes. We have voice actors and sound effects and music, and it's just a fun, weird story from somewhere in our region.
Thanks so much for being here. It's been informative and fun, which is a great combination.
Well, thanks. I didn't want to be bored or boring.
Thanks so much, Jeff.
Thank you, Peter.
That's a wrap of another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Tune in Monday when you'll hear another episode of Public Speaking with Peter George, and again Thursday for your next episode of Quick Bites, public speaking tips and techniques you can digest in 5 minutes or less. Until next time, remember, when it comes to speaking in public, you've got this.